Good morning, Patreon members. Joe Chaffee here. Hope everybody's having a great weekend. Just back from what you have seen was my vacation, and even on vacation, I still wind up posting and doing something. So I just did take it a little bit easier because I said I needed to seriously wind down my brain, which has been nonstop. And the last vacation that I took was a year ago, and literally a year ago, and have not really had very much time off. What little time off I've had taken was always winding up doing something for someone, and the occasional day fishing here and there. But I just needed some away time, and I got it. So now I got a fresh brain, and good. It's a good thing because we've got a lot of stuff going on today that's going to have impact both in the short and in the long haul. So we're going to get started. We're going to talk uh, about what will probably be Tropical Storm Michael at some point today, if not on the midday uh, advisory from the Hurricane Center, which will be out in an hour and a little less than an hour and a half. It will be a little bit for the advisory perhaps at around 5 p.m. because everything that I see on the satellite really looks as if this thing is getting ready to strengthen a bit. By the way, good morning to Jason Schaefer and Charlie Baker. I did see you on there. I'll, of course, come back and chat with everybody toward the end. This live stream is only for Patreon members, so it's exclusively for you guys. And we're going to be back to doing that this week. And might be some extra added stuff, too, with respect to what we're going to be dealing with down the road. Now, a couple of things on this loop. We're going from the overnight infrared to the visible. So I want to see some more visible frames in this to at least give me a sense of how this thing is. Oh, great. I just want to refresh this. Let's see if. Oh, lovely. Thank you so much. That was really great. All right, so I got this. Actually, this takes us up to, it's pretty much it's updating right now, which is a good thing. Okay, so you start to see the last few frames here on the visible. There's been quite a bit of convection developing off the coast of the Yucatan Peninsula. Just about all the convection, the heavy convection really is north and northeast of the center, which is sitting off the south coast of the Yucatan Peninsula by about 100 miles. So that increase in convection is at least telling us that the system is by all means a tropical depression, which is what the Hurricane Center upgraded to this morning, and it's likely to become a tropical storm. Now, notice a few things with respect to what's going on in the Gulf of Mexico. You've got a lot of the lower clouds that are moving from east to west. But if you notice up in the north central Gulf, you've also got some clouds going from west to east, the higher cloud tops. And even down in the southeast Gulf, you can see those higher cloud tops kind of blowing away to the northeast. There is quite a bit of upper air wind shear, up to about 25 or 30 knots. And that is it can be um, disruptive in terms of development, but right near where the low-level center is, the wind shear is a bit more relaxed, or at least relaxed enough that we're seeing the thunderstorms develop. And typically, in a system like this, in the Northwest Caribbean, it winds up having a bit of a tilted look, where you get a lot of stuff that's on the north and east side and southeast side, and at least initially, not much going on the west side of the circulation. So I suspect that this is going to just develop slowly until it gets into the southeastern Gulf. And it also appears that we are likely to see this thing uh, start to strengthen and maybe reach minimal hurricane status. A lot of the weather models overnight, especially the global models, got pretty aggressive with the intensity. Yesterday it was just the GFS, but the European kind of joined the party this morning with respect to Tropical Depression 14 and taking it up into at least a Category 2. I wonder if that's still pushing it uh, overall, but uh, we'll look at the intensity models here. Cynthia Guignatis, good morning to you. I just took a quick peek there on the chat board. Saw you on there. Uh, welcome on this Sunday morning. Hope everybody's got a good cup of coffee, by the way, as you're listening to all this stuff. So the intensity models overnight, just virtually all of them bring this up into a moderately strong tropical storm. We do have a handful of the intensity model plots that bring this into between a category 1 to touching a category 2 hurricane. I kind of like when I look at these things, I try to throw out the outliers. So I would throw out this one that has it, just sort of does this weird thing. I'm not sure what the track that you would connect with something that gets to a category 1, then weakens, and then strengthens to a cat 2 afterward, unless it does something where it turns it sharply eastward and takes it across Florida and out into the Atlantic. That's about the only thing I can imagine. And I also would probably just, take out the outliers on the bottom, one outlier on the top and one outlier on the bottom, and focus as always on where the cluster of them are. And it looks like a bunch of them do take this up to strong tropical storm or minimal hurricane by about 72 hours. We're looking at a landfall here sometime probably around midday Wednesday in terms of the timing. Now, the hurricane model forecast tracks uh, moving slowly northward, then kind of going northwest, and then north, and then northeast. And you'll notice that um, the vast majority of the tracks here are east of the Appalachian Mountains. So I think we need to pay attention to that with regards to weather impacts from the southeast coast of the U.S. northeastward, and then possibly some weather impacts for areas from eastern Pennsylvania through southern New England and everybody in between. This could wind up over time, and I'm just kind of openly speculating here. Uh, if it winds up going east of the Appalachians, where let's say it's on the eastern part of this um, guidance envelope here, and let's say the tracks on the eastern part of the wind up being where this goes. And this is actually the concept is supported by the European, which is furthest to the east. The GFS is on the northwestern side of this envelope. The operational model is. You start to get, you could get into a situation where you'll see this in terms of its character, transition over to something resembling more of a non-tropical system. Which would mean you'll probably have some wind and you will have heavy rains. The heavy rains will shift to the northwest side of the system of the surface low. So this potentially could bring some heavy rains to the Carolinas, into Virginia, and on up into eastern PA to southern New England. The good news with all of that is, even if we wound, let's say we wind up with a worst case scenario with respect to what happens to this after this goes inland, where you wind up with a fairly well developed semi-tropical or post-tropical low that moves along, you wind up really with about a 6 to 8 hour period of rain to deal with. This is not going to be anything that stalls out. It's going to be accelerating as it moves to the northeast, because you have a lot of stuff going on in the upper air that is going to basically take this thing and then just punt it away to the northeast. And the other thing to remember is that this is going to be a catalyst for some longer term weather changes in the across North America. And I'm going to show you that in just a second. So here's the GFS ensembles, arguing with the idea of a low, and the ensembles actually are south and east of the operational. The operational model is to the north and west of this. But you look at that mean track into interior South Carolina, North Carolina, and then moves it into southeastern Virginia, which is where the Hurricane Center, by the way, has this on its forecast, and then just races it east northeast from there across the Atlantic. And it actually intensifies in terms of when you look at these pressures in the longer range, they're pretty low. So it does intensify this into a major ocean storm, be it tropical or non-tropical or something in between, as it moves across the North Atlantic. But I think we're going to probably wind up with some impact here for eastern PA to southern New England along about Thursday. I think Thursday into Thursday night. It's going to be about a 6 to 8 hour time frame. And depending on where the surface low is and what kind of technicals we're dealing with in terms of the structure of this will determine whether we might wind up with some winds along the coast. We'll see. The other thing is, again, the other big questions I think is going to be, how much strengthening are we going to see in the Gulf of Mexico for the impacts that it might have for the Florida Panhandle back westward? I'm kind of thinking that the tightness of the cluster of the members of both the GFS and the hurricane model forecast tracks suggests that there's fairly high confidence that you're looking at a landfall. The furthest west of this, let's take out the green, the bright green. This might be the justification for what the model had, that intensity model, where it strengthened it to a hurricane late in the period, taking it northwestward, then turning it sharply eastward across Florida, and then moving out. So let's discount that one and just go with all the other ones, which have pretty much the same idea. The westernmost track is at Mobile. You have a lot of them clustered over the Florida Panhandle, east of Pensacola and north and west of Tampa. So it's probably a good bet that's where this will go. And also, you'll notice that they are tightly clustered from central New Jersey in terms of the tract of the surface low to off the Virginia, North Carolina coast. So anything that goes in here, if it starts to look more like a non-tropical system over time, you're going to wind up with that band of heavy rain north and northwest of the surface low, rather than being to the north, to the east, to the northeast and east of the surface low. You're going to gradually start to see that rain area shift eastward. So if we're talking about a 6 to 8 hour period of rain, that's going to obviously limit what the rainfall amounts are going to be. Here's the Hurricane Center's forecast, which kind of lines up with the models. They do bring it to minimal hurricane by 1 a.m. Wednesday. So there is a little bit of time. The ocean water, the Gulf of Mexico water temperatures in that latitude longitude box, they are all between 28 and 30 degrees Celsius. So it certainly could be supportive for some strengthening, and maybe the chance that it could wind up getting to be more than just a Cat 1 before it makes landfall. But I'm going to be cautious, and I'm going to be a little bit skeptical, if only because of the fact that you don't have the most ideal conditions aloft with respect to strengthening. They're okay, but they're not super ideal. And on the other side of this, of course, is the fact that when it comes to intensity with tropical systems, that is always dicey with regards to forecasting that. So just the latest advisory position was 18.9 and 86.8. Top winds 35 miles an hour, moving north at 3. That's about 100 miles, by the way, east of Chetumal in Mexico, along the southern portion of the Yucatan Peninsula. And we do have tropical storm warnings that are up with this for western Cuba. Looks like that might also be up for parts of the Grand Cayman, and then the northeastern corner of the Yucatan Peninsula. There's nothing up yet for the Gulf of Mexico, and I don't think you're going to see anything being put up today with regards to the Gulf. At least that's the way I'm looking at it. Now, with respect to the long range, by the way, let me just jump real quick. I want to see. Good. Okay, we got our little group here, which is good. Patreon members, I encourage you to join the chat board and put up your questions or comments. Okay, everybody is welcome, and no issues here, and no question, no matter how silly you think it is, ask it. Okay, because it probably isn't silly at all. So here's your upper air pattern going forward. Where we're going to see some changes here, and the tropics are which have been driving the weather pattern pretty much for the last couple of weeks, especially on the Pacific side, are going to continue to drive it forward in the long range. We have a reflection of the system coming into the Gulf of Mexico. If you look on the lower left, that wrapped up circle there, that is Hurricane Sergio, which is going to be responding to this deep trough that is going to be down the Rockies. You can see the strong ridge that's off the New Jersey coast on Tuesday. And the tropical systems are basically going to energize the upper air and create a pattern change. We've got by Wednesday afternoon, the reflection of what would be Michael all coming into the Florida Panhandle. And notice that the trough in the west, you get a short wave trough that swings into the Mississippi Valley, another one that drops down west of the Rockies to the coast down to California. That picks up Sergio and races that to the Baja Peninsula. So you got these two systems here in play with this upper air setup that we have. So now Michael gets kicked away to the northeast, but notice that while all of this is going on, we're getting the upper flow strongly energized in eastern Canada, where a vortex begins to form, and that strengthens. So you've got the energy from Michael just lifting up to the northeast and just getting involved, at least according to the world of the GFS, gets involved with this vortex that forms in eastern Canada, and this becomes the driver now, where we see a complete disruption of the ridge in the east, and that comes, by the way, by Friday, Saturday. So we're talking about getting into the short range here. So I think the confidence level of this idea is high. Whether it's as strong as the GFS or not remains to be seen. But you can see how this sort of drives the pattern going forward into next weekend. It's going to get pretty cool around here. We're going to see a definite shift to an autumn pattern with below average temperatures going through next weekend and beyond. The GFS certainly is signaling that this is going to be a pattern that's going to last for a while. We're into the middle week of the month of October, so now we're into Thursday the 18th. So part of that trough lifts out, and you start to think that, well, okay, there was the ridge going to build back in the east, but the model insisting that a new vortex forms with a new deep trough late in the period. Of course, we know the skepticism here as we go long range, but you get the idea that at least inside now the 10-day time frame, we're going to see a significant change in the upper air weather pattern, and this is all being driven by the tropics. Just want to kind of correspond this with the European, which pretty much same story, although the European does have this thing, coming out off the North Carolina coast. So the European has a track that's a little more to the east of where the GFS has it. The GFS is on the northwestern side of the envelope, the European on the southeast side. But the overall idea of a strengthening flow in eastern Canada and a deep trough in the eastern part of the United States is confirmed by the European as well as the GFS. And of course, now when we get to the middle of next week, the trough is part of that trough is trying to lift out. But you do have a strong ridge in the west, and you do have a trough that starts to drop into the Gulf of Alaska. So this at least suggests to me that even though initially in the long range, this trough is going to lift out as all troughs do, but it's going to be replaced by another one coming down the pike. So sometimes, we've often say that it takes big events sometimes to really drive the upper air pattern, and in this particular case, it might not necessarily be the development of a huge storm, but there's enough here to where the tropical systems are energizing the pattern going forward, energizing the changes that are going to be going on across North America. Here's the surface map for us, of course, for today, and the cold front that is dropping down from the north. This is going to be another one of these weak backdoor fronts with another high that goes into eastern Canada, New Brunswick, toward Nova Scotia and the Maritimes. So initially, the flow here for Monday, I don't think we're going to have much in the way of shower activity today. There might be the odd shower late this afternoon into tonight, or even a little bit of drizzle this morning in some places. We'll probably have a few peaks of sun developing at some point. But going forward, that high just kind of parks itself off the coast. You start to see this really strong flow coming in from along the southeast coast of the U.S. With the high settling to our south. And that, at least for Tuesday and Wednesday, cuts off the onshore flow to some degree. It's going to make things warm, and it's going to make things rather humid, an increasing amount of tropical moisture getting involved. And now, here comes the cold front from the west, and the deep trough that is driving this, and then you've got Michael getting punted away to the northeast. there's the GFS's track here. See that this is where you wind up seeing this transition over. You notice how the heaviest rains on the GFS shift westward here. This is what happens when these systems start to transition, begin a transition process as they move into the higher latitudes, particularly during the month of October, where you've got a lot of other energy going on with respect to the jet stream in Canada feeding into this, and then it moves it out toward the northeast, having some impact over Nova Scotia. Of course, track is going to be key here. I want to bring up the North Atlantic so we can at least follow this along. And by the way, for those of you who are still paying attention to Leslie, which is moving southeastward, you can see it here, getting almost to the Canary Islands, or going just north of the Canary Islands before it's basically back on the African coast. I mean, this is a really unusual setup to be sure. But Michael will maintain an identity here, passing south of Nova Scotia, just south of Nova Scotia, but it does bring some rain there. And I know Nova Scotia's in need for some heavy rains. It's been very dry there, and south of Newfoundland, and then it gradually just kind of evolves into a North Atlantic storm, and you see it here going forward. It sort of loses its identity as the North Atlantic surface low that develops north of Newfoundland, just absorbs it over time, and then it winds up heading toward Iceland. But we've got a pretty cool flow and a very cool weather pattern coming forward in the long range. Again, all of this being driven by the tropical systems, and particularly Michael and the action that's going on with the jet stream in Canada. Let me just give a quick look here. Let's take a look at what's happening radar-wise this morning. So in case you've got some plans for the day, and I'm going to come up to the chat board in just a little bit, but there's some shower activity in Northwest PA. We've got some shower activity up in upstate New York that's moving eastward, but there really isn't too much happening going on along the coast unless there's the sprinkle or a little bit of drizzle running around. And with respect to severe weather threats today, I've got the Storm Prediction Center's map, and you'll notice, there's not a whole lot going on just from the standpoint of severe weather in the east. We do have marginal severe risk across Texas, much of central and west Texas, on up through a good chunk of Oklahoma, and extending up into parts of Missouri and southeastern Kansas, and a slight risk that runs along the Texas-New Mexico border and into New Mexico. And we're still dealing with some marginal risk in parts of the southwest with some leftover tropical moisture that is hanging around there. But at least from our standpoint, we know that the weather front that's coming through today is not going to be especially problematic with regards to showers and thunderstorms. It looks to move through fairly weakly. So here we go on the board. Weather Lover sent you a question this morning for Judah Cohen. Yes, thank you. Scott Briller asking about Judah Cohen tomorrow, and if Joe Rayo is going to be joining me tomorrow, which is really cool. So we're gonna have fun with this, and I'm really looking forward to it. Also, let me just say to emphasize, I probably don't need to say this, but whenever we're looking at any kind of indices regarding the long range, there are, be it El Nino, La Nina, the North Atlantic Oscillation, the East Pacific Oscillation, all of those things. There's no magic bullet, okay? When it comes to trying to figure it out in terms of the short term, there is no magic bullet. If you went strictly by the measures of those indices, you would have busted so many forecasts last winter because of the unusual nature of the winter, in that we had these indices stretched to these ridiculous extremes, and they created some weird things, including those 4 nor'easters in March. So they're guides, and we're going to talk about this with Dr. Cohen, along with the Siberian snow cover concept. Indicators tend to work until everybody figures it out, and then they kind of, you have everybody sort of piled on, looking for this one magic bullet that seems to be working, and every single time that happens, that is the point where the indicator stops working, and you wind up throwing your hands up, saying, well, it was supposed to turn out differently than what was shown, and what went wrong. So always keep an open mind with these sorts of things, and remember, no, there are no magic bullets, and you're doing research and work, and you're trying to, I guess it's the elusive trying to find that magic bullet. I don't know that we ever will. The longer term weather pattern, weather lover, in terms of the change, we are going to see a change as illustrated, and I think it may hang around for a bit. Oh, and by the way, any of you is any of you that uh, uh, some that are with Judah Cohen tomorrow. It's at 7. We're going to be starting it slightly after 7 o'clock. I just want to make sure everything is technically set up right. The audio and everything else, because I have problems with that when I'm doing it from work. So figure it around 7:05 is a start time. Um, you know, if you haven't already, if you do have questions, message those questions to me, or put them on one of the Judah Cohen posts that I've put up. I'll put up another one later today to remind everybody. Attach your question in the comments there. I hope to get everybody's question, whether it be specific or perhaps your question might be part of other questions. We'll wrap it up. But Patreon members, the way I'm going to work this is that everybody's going to be on the live stream. Okay. It's going to be a public live stream on YouTube, but the questions from Patreon members will come first and get first priority. And assuming that we go through those, and then I'll go to the YouTube chat and take questions from there. And again, some of them are going to overlap, but you guys are going to get first priority on this. I was not on an escorted tour, Scott Briller, with regards to Gettysburg. We did do is we purchased there's an auto tour that you can purchase, and it's DVD discs. It's $30, and you can take the tour with doing it that way in your own vehicle. And it was, once we figured out where we had to go, it was a little bit problematic at first to getting to the first of 16 stops. And there are signs, because you have to, when the tour starts, you actually go through part of the town of Gettysburg to get to the areas that you need to get to. But once you get it going, it worked perfectly fine. They have bus tours there. I believe they were more expensive. I think it was $75 a piece. I don't know, but the car tour at $30 worked perfectly fine. And you can, of course, once you purchase that DVD disc, you can always give it to someone else who's going there and let them use it. David DeBoer, is tomorrow going to be recorded for Patreon members? I have a conflict. Okay, anytime, just so you know, anytime we do these Patreon exclusive live streams, they are once they're done, I've been putting up the link, because they're not listed publicly, so you can't go to my YouTube channel and find them. Okay, but what I do is, after the live stream is done, I put up a link, so that the channel link, and actually the channel link, the watch channel link that you see before, that's before, should work. But either way, I do put up the final video link so that you will have access to it and no one else does. The YouTube one for tomorrow night, that's a public one. So if you do miss it, any public videos that I do on YouTube, and those are usually the ones I do at night, anytime those videos, those are all in my on my YouTube channel page. You can access them at any time. So if you miss the live stream, you can certainly watch the replay. If you've got a problem where you can't find it, or you want the link, message me on the Patreon board. Message me. I'll get you the link. Okay. I will try not to forget to do that, but just in case, if you can't find the link, you'll get it. There's a great link on Judah's Twitter account explaining how he forecasted last year's winters. Oh, great, Scott! If you can, if you find it, if you got the Twitter link to it, if you're on Twitter, um, share it with me. I would appreciate it. Or get a chance, I'll try to find it myself. But everybody's got their kind of approach in terms of uh, how uh, how they deal with forecasting in both the short and long range. And as I've said many times, I am not good at the long range stuff. I can't seem to get my head around it. So, and that there are a lot of long range people that you hand them the short range stuff, and they're just like, what? I don't understand this. They're really fascinated by the long range, trying to forecast things out for several months in advance or more, and I totally respect that. And I'm on the other side of the equation. Also, as Joe Rayo has often described, what Joe and I do are basically sort of function of the way general practitioners function. You know a little bit of everything, of most things, but you're not particularly, expert in any one field. So this is where you defer to the specialists, the severe weather specialists, the long range specialists, the hurricane specialists, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's a pretty good description of how things work. Uh, uh, let's see. If I look at what people have asked Angry Gren and has asked me anything, but you'll see ridiculous questions. I understand. I get it. Curious how the Gulf is doing water temp wise. Not much has happened this year down there besides Gordon. The water temperatures have been fine. Actually, the water temperatures have been running a little bit above average, but this is a perfect example of what, the water temperatures are certainly important for tropical storm development. But if you don't have the upper air dynamics, you're not going to get much to happen there. And the problem has been strong upper air winds in the atmosphere that have been dominating the pattern across the Gulf of Mexico, but in particular across the Caribbean. The Caribbean has been seeing strong upper air winds virtually all season long, and that we have this instance where even though we are seeing something developing here, we are still doing it under upper air conditions that are not that ideal. Mark Glatfelter, do you think this pattern change coming up might really throw us into winter? I think it's a little too early for that. Uh, I think what you should look for, I think what you need to look for in this is going to be the staying power of once the change takes place. What is the staying power of it? How long are we going to hold on to the idea of a trough more in the east and more of a ridge in the west? That I think is something that we're going to need to evaluate. As far as being immediately flipped into winter, we're only talking about a time frame going into the middle part of October here. So let's be a bit realistic, especially if you're down, closer to coastal areas. We did see the switch flipped early last year as we headed toward the end of November and beginning of December. And I think one clue you might look for in the next several weeks after this tropical system is done, is that going to be the last one? Because there is at least some evidence that suggests that when you have hurricane seasons that shut down early in the Atlantic side, on the Atlantic basin, that it tends to be in years where the winters start early. Okay, or let's say the winters are front end loaded. That happened last year. If you remember last year, after about the 15th of October, I don't think we really had anything in the tropics, both close to us or even well offshore. I'll have to go double check that. But for the most part, the hurricane season shut down in the middle of October, and we had that early start. Nothing ever repeats exactly the same way, so I would not necessarily conclude that we're going to see some sort of extreme pattern set up. I don't really see too many signs of that at the moment. But that on the other hand, a month from now we could be talking all sorts of different things. So past performance is never really an indicator of future outcomes, but unfortunately, it's one of the few things we have to look at and base our evaluations on. Our hurricane season began late, Jason Schaefer. I think that depends on how you look at it, because if you look at the number of systems that we had, it actually began rather early and behaved pretty much according to form going into early August. I think everybody has this notion that there's supposed to be this sort of explosive um, period season of nonstop activity, and it really doesn't work that way. We're headed into the 13th named storm, which would put us probably about a little bit above average for the whole overall hurricane season. What I would say, and this is where maybe we could sort of massage what you're saying. Um, when we look at the total number of hurricanes that we've seen, with 13 named tropical storms, we've seen Florence, we've seen Chris, Florence, and Leslie, and that's it. So 3 hurricanes on 13 tropical storms. So that kind of tells you that the upper air was not really all that supportive with respect to these tropical systems developing into full-fledged hurricanes. So the upper air winds were at best marginally favorable, because we did have we've had an above normal number, or we will have after today, maybe an above normal number of tropical storms. But in terms of total hurricanes, we've only gotten 3 so far. One of them's been a major, and that was Florence, and that's been it. So yeah, the total number of actual hurricanes has been subpar. And also, we had to wait, except for Chris, there was nothing until Florence came along late in August and early September. So such as it is, we'll start to look now again at whether the hurricane season winds up shutting down early. All right, folks, let's call it a day at this point. Everything's going to get back to normal as we move through the next couple of weeks. I do have another uh, stretch of time off planned at the very last days of October and the first days of November, in that week time frame. So that is I'm going to be. It's not really a vacation so much. I'm going to be doing some things I have to take care of, but I don't think it'll be too disruptive to the weather forecasting website posts, Patreon posts, and live streams. Just going to have to. I will manage it when we get there, but we're back to normal for the next couple of weeks anyway. So that's a good thing. All right. Thank you, Cynthia. Appreciate it. Again, if you've never been to Gettysburg, I was in Washington, D.C., Richmond, Appomattox, Gettysburg, Philadelphia. Okay. And if you've never been to Gettysburg, that just really just left such an impression in my mind. It's just, I can't really even describe it, because it's about the place and where you are, and the hallowed grounds that it is. And it is, you're walking on an area where thousands of people, thousands of soldiers died, both from the north and the south, and the cemetery that's there, and you can see the tombs of so many people, unknown. Union soldiers are buried there, and it is it's just it's part of our history. If you're a history buff, it's a definite must go. Also, when I was in Washington, I went to the White House. I went to the Capitol. If you want a White House tour, um, what you need to do is call your congressman ahead of time, so that you can get vetted security wise, and they will set up the tour for you, and usually get a choice of dates. So you let them know when you're going to be in Washington, D.C., and your local congressman should be able to set up a tour for you, and also a tour of the Capitol. You want to do the Capitol building, where Congress is, and also obviously the White House. And we went to Arlington National Cemetery, another place that you should go to, very solemn place. And we did the National Archives, the Library of Congress. There's all sorts of stuff. And by the way, a lot of that, the vast majority of it, doesn't cost you anything. It's free. Taxpayer funded. the National Zoo, totally free, no admission, nothing. So highly recommend. We went to see that. Richmond, we went to the Confederate White House of Jefferson Davis, which is up in the town. It's part of the U.S. park system. And then we went to Appomattox, which was another um, very interesting place where Lee surrendered to Grant to end the Civil War. And it does require a lot of driving to get to all these places because Richmond and Appomattox is at least a couple of hours drive uh, from Washington, and then you have to drive it back. Gettysburg was not a long drive though from D.C. up to Gettysburg. I think it was basically an hour and a half with a little extra added time for traffic. So highly recommended. Yes, they did let me in, Cynthia. I passed all the security checks. Um, and the security is quite tight. You go through security in some places, especially in the Capitol building. You go through it, and then as you're in the building and you're going into different spots, you wind up going through it again every single time. So you go through multiple rounds of security while you're actually in the building, which really I was not expecting that. And you know, after after a while, we're so used to it now. But I go back to a time before 9/11 when you could, pretty much get into all these places without having to deal with very much, if any, security at all. And sadly, those times are long gone. All right, folks. Again, thanks for being here, Mark Glatfelter. You not far. You're 30 miles from Gettysburg. It is a great place, and definitely going to be a return visit for me. All right, we'll leave it at that, and we'll be waiting to see what the Hurricane Center does in about 40 minutes or so with regards to the tropical depression and whether they upgrade it to a tropical storm. Look for some more posts coming up later today. YouTube live stream probably tonight. We'll maybe do it after 8 o'clock when everything's in with the evening guidance package, and we'll take it from there. All right, have a great day, folks. We'll see you later.